Hello, everyone. Hello. They do, and somehow it disappeared when I was gone. I know. I think Richard Manley still has it. He's not here.
You guys can't do anything. Huh? You're not supposed to do anything before that.
No, but we can, something happened.
Welcome to the Bedford Historical Society. I'd like to thank our bakers, Phyllis Cook, Jeanette Potier, and Carol Hands for baking everything this month. And I've already signed up people for next month, but we still have openings in April. If anybody would like to get involved in April. Or we're all set for next month. Minutes of the last meeting is going to be leaked.
Good evening. Our secretary Marion couldn't be here this evening, and she asked me to read the minutes on her behalf. She gave me her minutes. I'll have to ask you to imagine that she also gave me her charm. Our last meeting was way back in October. The second fall 2000 membership meeting of the Bedford Historical Society was held here on October 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Following the social time, the meeting was called to order by President Michael Siebert. Minutes of the previous meeting were read and approved. Hostesses and bakers, ably led by Cecile Walker, were thanked for a lovely social. Treasurer Helen Nowers gave a financial report on the various funds held by the Society. The challenge gift, $79,141. Matching endowment, $49,040. General operating funds, $25,563. Total, $153,744. Don Corrier reported that the annual giving campaign letter was approved at the Board of Directors meeting and that members should be watching for its arrival. Michael suggested Depot Park as a place to get historical Christmas gifts. Jeanette invited members to the Joe Lane Harvest Party. Members were alerted to the need for goodies and auction items for the holiday party to be held at the Moonins. John Brown had 4 articles about the Old Town Line available for examining on one of the tables in our room. Following adjournment, Cecile Walker introduced Mr. William Patton, whose entertaining program, New England Lighthouses, included history and stories of lighthouses and their keepers, submitted by Marion Bryan.
Somebody move to accept the minutes?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. All opposed? Good. Treasurer's report.
Bedford Historical Society, Inc., fund balance is December 31st, 2003. Unrestricted, $21,990. Matching endowment, $60,606. Challenge gift, $84,170. Total funds, $166,766. I want to keep these two.
Thank you. We have new members, Shannon McNamara and Jim Machulis. I was going to try it.
Okay.
Shannon and Jim, they were at the Christmas party, but this is really their first official meeting here. We also have Lois and Donald Jenkins, who aren't really members yet, but they offered to write a check tonight if our membership person was here. So we're going to count them as new members, even though they're not official quite yet. Don Corey.
Hopefully this will be the last go-around on our famous linen press. You probably have seen the article in the last newsletter. Subsequent to that, Mary Paper and Bob Slechta and I met with Stephen Fletcher, the head of the appraisal department for Skinner Auction Galleries. And I think the only change from what was in the newsletter is he said he had to give us a conservative number as a base number, what the bottom end of what we might get for the linen press. And the number he gave, 1,000 to 1,500, basically is the same as what the estimate was by the other gallery. But Skinner probably still can get a better upscale crowd, so we would like to proceed with sale of this linen press. I think part of the problem, there's a strip of molding that's missing. Turned out the hinges on the doors that open have been restored. It was a very good restoration job, but all of these things tend to reduce the value. And so we do intend to proceed to try to auction off that. And of course, the proceeds have to go back into they go into the matching endowment because they have to be used for the museum and archive collections. So unless anybody has any comments or any other reason or wants to make a big offer, if you want to make a big offer, see me after the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. Jeanette?
I just wanted to tell the people that the Joe Biden annual meeting will be later this year. It will be held here on March 28th. It's a Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock, and we're going to have a low tea, as opposed to a high tea. So for those of you, your newsletter will be coming.
Thank you. The Joe Blaine Annual Dinner is March 28th at 2 p.m. Sunday.
Right.
Okay. Any other announcements? Depot Park? Historical Preservation Commission? Nothing else? Okay. If anyone had any feedback about having the Christmas party in the afternoon instead of the evening, Cecile's the person you want to talk to. And,
I had good results. People liked it there.
all right, and I guess our activity.
It's good to see everybody here, and I just talked to Mike a minute ago, and I think maybe we might need a microphone. What do you think? Can you all, you think we might need one? Because I think that Cano is here, who comes up here to talk, especially those in the back, especially as we're over 39, it's a little harder. So, we'll talk about it, right, Mike? So in the meantime, we have Mr. Paul Hoagland here tonight, who's going to talk about the Boston Post roads. And Paul, I'm going to let you fill it in with your background. So come on up.
Did everyone who wants one get a copy of the map? I have some extras here.
There's some more at the table.
There's maps here. You can explain what they are, Paul. And tell them about your background, because if I don't write things down, I don't always remember it.
That's okay. Well, I just want to say that it's a pleasure to be here tonight. I've been doing this for about 4 years now. My background is that I started out with the Monotony Minutemen, so I'm very familiar with Bedford because we come to your Liberty Pole capping and have for over 30 years. So that's part of how I got involved with history. I worked for Polaroid for 35 years as a financial analyst, and in 1997 I had to leave. 1,800 of us had to leave. And I turned to my true love, which is history. And when I was with the Minutemen, starting with them, we gave talks through schools and different communities and everything, and I kind of picked up on that. It's something that I really enjoy doing. I teach evening division April 18th and 19th, 1775, 3-night course with slides at the Arlington High, Minuteman Tech, and Woburn High School. And I've been doing the Boston Post Road for about 3 years, a one-night session with slides. You're going to get a little condensed version of that. I do a 2-hour program with them. This will be just about an hour. And my latest one is King Philip's War. People showed an interest in that. I did. I ran all over the place for slides. But basically, and I belong to the Arlington Historical Society. I'm vice president. Doesn't mean anything, but I'm vice president, and I've been with them for a great number of years. I do tours of the Jason Russell House, and I'd like to just invite you people, probably through Mike, and I forgot your name in the back.
Cecile.
Oh, Cecile. And a couple of people I invite you, if you haven't, because even though we're close in town, come through the Jason Russell House, I would be more than happy to arrange with these people to take you through. I think you'll find it interesting, and we would enjoy coming through probably a couple of houses in Bedford, which I know a lot of us haven't done. So that's enough of my background. We're here to kind of talk about the Boston Post roads. I'm just going to start out with by saying that the maps you have around the 1630s, okay, a little bit after the 1630s. We're going to start with a little bit of history of the Boston Post roads so we can kind of find out how they started, and then we'll get into actually traveling. Now, I did say the right term, post roads, because we're doing 3 roads tonight. And this is Evening Division 2 gets 3 roads, which is the upper road, the old original Boston Post road, the middle road, and what we call the lower road. So we will travel those tonight. I kind of think it's easier, I found out, if you have questions, something that I didn't cover, to either see me afterwards or at least wait till after I'm done, because it might be something that I'm going to cover in the hour that I'm with you. So it's just kind of easier to hold off, and I'll be more than happy to take questions on that. Okay? Well, the post roads, really, it all boiled down to communication. And how all of this started was in the Mass Bay colony in the 1630s. 1620s, actually, with the Pilgrim, did a little communication. But in the 1630s, when towns really started up, the main communications were neighbors, actually merchants. There were a few merchants that were traveling around, or the local taverns, or inns, or ordinaries, as they called them. You would gather and get some of the latest information. And by, if you, please excuse the term, I kind of stay in the history world, so please excuse me. So tonight, instead of Native Americans, I'm going to take out of the textbook Indians, if you don't mind, okay? I know that's not proper today, but I just want to refer to them as they were in our books, okay? And they were actually runners, okay? They were Indian runners that would send messages from settlement to settlement. So that's how all of this came about, informally, okay? Now, formally, in 1633, the first white settlers actually started communicating and actually had a run from Mass Bay, up near Boston and Plymouth, to the Connecticut Valley. So as early as 1633, they started a little bit of communication in the Mass Bay colony. In 1638, there was a road from Watertown to Concord to Sudbury. It was more of a path, even though the books say roads, because what you're going to find out is a lot of the Boston Post roads were originally Indian paths. The Indians could communicate, they could hunt, but they could also communicate with tribes on these paths. And that's where a lot of these post roads weave in and out, as you'll see later on. Now, how did we come about the Boston Post Road? It was actually through Charles III over in England that recommended very strongly that there should be communication in the colonies, okay? So he sent a Governor Francis Lovelace to be governor of New York. And he said, I would like to have you meet with Governor Winthrop of Connecticut, and I would like to have you set up communications in the colonies, in the New England, basically, colonies. And that's how all of this started. In 1668, they actually met. And by 1672, they had actually laid out the original Boston Post Road. Now, the original Boston Post Road, first of all, I think we can have the lights. I'm sorry, I took you by surprise. The Boston Post roads, back then, were laid out, the original road from New York, and let me turn on the projector here so we can, okay, go one step further back. This is my mailbox, and it's got post on it because if we think about Boston Post roads, I came up with on my own, okay, that the reason why that they called it Boston Post Road, the original road ran from New York, which the first post rider left, and ran from New York to Hartford, up to north, Springfield, and east into Boston. And my theory is that Boston Post Road was because the destination was in fact Boston, that's why it wasn't named, which it could have been, the New York Post Road, right? Because in fact, that's where it started from, was New York. Post, as you know, is an early colonial term, actually a British English term for mailing. You post a letter, okay? So we were under English rule, obviously, colony. So Boston Post Road really was, Boston was the destination. Mail and correspondence, post was the key word, because that's what which you'll find out tonight, the post rider carried on his first run, was in fact correspondence. And of course, road is road. So Boston Post Road kind of got its name there. Now, in 1672, Governor Francis had pretty much everything laid out, and they were ready to make the first run. On January 22nd, 1673, the first post rider started from New York City, and actually it was below the financial district of New York, what is today New York, okay? And it started from New York City, like I said, and I told you kind of where it went, okay? And the first post rider, interestingly enough, we don't know his name, and we don't know anything about him. Such a historical ride, and yet we don't know anything about that first post rider. But we do know one thing. Remember I said they started out in January 22nd? Guess how far we got the first day? Not far, 15 miles, that's all. Why January? You can guess. Tremendous bad weather, almost blizzard down in the New York, Long Island area. So therefore the post rider didn't get too far. But in fact, it took him 14 days in total to get from New York in that bad weather to Boston. He started January 22nd and landed in Boston on February the 5th. And he was carrying a couple of what we call post or correspondence or letters in his diver or diver bag or saddlebags. That's what the first post riders carried the mail with. Okay, what is the criteria or the guidelines that they set up for the post rider? Well, actually, there are only three. You're going to get a kick out of this. The criteria for the post rider was a stout fellow, active, and true to fidelity. That was the criteria, okay? Stout because probably it was a harsh ride, okay? Fidelity, kind of they threw in that they really wanted him to, kind of be loyal. And active, this gentleman couldn't be one of the townspeople that were kind of laid back. He had to be active to be a post rider. So that was kind of the only criteria way back then. What did they expect of the post riders? How far did they expect them to go? Well, 30 to 50 miles a day in good weather is what was expected. And again, that would depend on the horses and the rider himself. And in bad weather, all they say is considerably more. So obviously, in the spring, when you got the mud season and everything, they're going to be slowed up tremendously. And obviously in the winter, with the snows and the storms, they're going to be pretty much laid up. But 30 to 50 miles was probably expected in good weather in that post rider. Well, you can see the post rider here. This is very unusual. See the young lady on the back of the horse here? They did not pick up normally people, and the reason was the wear and tear of the horses. There were stations that they would change horses. They went at a pretty good clip. Please don't ask me how fast they went. I was asked that, and I said, I don't know. I'm sure they had their own pace, but they did know the pace to go to the next station for changing horses. And the reason why they wouldn't pick up, again, people is because of the, the wear and tear on the horses from station to station. But every once in a while, they would help a young lady. Now, she might have been very close in going into this particular settlement. She might have had an injury, been sitting by the side of the road. We don't know exactly why in this portrait, but if they could help somebody, they certainly would. Now, you see this sign up here? When the post rider was due to come into a particular settlement to bring the mail or correspondence, that day was called post day in the settlement. And so this particular rider, you can see him handing the correspondence to the gentleman that's taking it, and he'll distribute it for the different people in the settlement. Now, in 1691, the Crown took over the postal riders. So we went from postal riders to what they call royal messengers. And this is what a royal messenger looks like. Okay, this is a statue that's at the Museum of Postage and Stamps in Weston, Mass. Okay, please disregard the Halloween banners. They wouldn't let me take down the banners for this picture. But this is an excellent picture of the first royal messenger. Now notice the difference between what you might have pictured as the post rider, maybe a cape, heavy coating, but a townsperson. Now we're getting formal. Notice a particular leather hat, the long coat, didn't have to be red, but a lot of them were. That's to keep all the mud. And this is what I love about this statue, so realistic. The mud on his boots. Here's his diva or diver bag that he would be carrying his correspondence in. And when he would come to a particular part of the settlement where he was to drop off the messages, he would blow his horn just to let people know postage has arrived. The post is come. Okay? So that was done in 1691, which meant that now they were under the Crown. Well, remember I mentioned that I did a little something on King Philip's War? You guessed it. King Philip's War didn't play too much havoc, but did obviously on the upper post road cause problems with the post riders, but not as much as we think. King Philip's War, as you know, was 1675 to 1676, but he was in, other tribes joined him, and the Nipmucks up in the Brookfield area played havoc. I'm going to show you a couple of stones, because up in that area they have a lot on King Philip's area. But I just wanted to let you know that the post riders were very leery once they started going east from Worcester and Springfield, because up in that area were Indians that were sympathizers of King Philip's War. Okay, in 1692, Andrew Hamilton became Postmaster General in the colonies. And in 1751, he appointed Benjamin Franklin and William Hunter as Assistant Deputy Postmasters. What was their job? Their job was basically to set up a postal system in the colonies. Okay, this is 1751. Benjamin Franklin had the northern New England and northern colonies, and William Hunter took charge of the southern colonies. Benjamin Franklin did an excellent job. William Hunter did a fine job, but Benjamin Franklin set up rates for different correspondence, letters and packages and papers. He set up actually markers along the road, which I'm going to tell you about in a minute. And he set up a whole postal system. But you know what he did? He was a smart fellow. He went out among the people and talked to the people and checked the roads. Now, I'm sorry, I'm one slide behind. There's your King Philip. Believe it or not, it's interesting. We don't really know what he looked like, but this you probably have seen is the most famous. There's two very famous pictures, and this is one of them. Okay, this is in the Brookfield area, and it's so hard. These stones are so withered out, but in West Brookfield, on one of the roads that I'm going to show you in a few minutes, it says that this was a garrison in August 2nd to August 4th, 1676. King Philip came through here and massacred pretty much all of Brookfield. He pretty much burnt out the whole town. You can see a lot of these markers in the Brookfield area. This is actually Littleton, wasn't Littleton in this area, but here's another sample of Philip coming through this area. And this is a 14-year-old girl, Mary Shepherd, February 12, 1676, who saw her whole family annihilated. This particular marker is on Route 119 in Littleton, right at near a stoplight. And if you look over, if you're going towards Acton and Townsend on Route 119, you come to the light for Neshoba, for the skiing. Look over on your left just before that, because that's where this marker is. But you can see Philip was over in this area too, what is now Littleton. And now we have Benjamin Franklin. 1753 was a milestone for Benjamin Franklin, because what he did is he started going out to the different towns in New England, and he actually started checking the roads, the condition of the roads, what the post riders were traveling, and talking to the townspeople too. to get a better feel for a good postal system, okay? So he went out, like I said, in 1753 and started doing this. He also did something else, which we still have a couple of markers left. In 1753, he laid stone markers a mile apart, not along all of the old Boston Post Road, the upper road, but at different intervals, okay? And guess what? I found a couple of these markers. Notice the color of these markers, they're clay. This could have come from Connecticut. A lot of the stone markers way back in the 18th century were using clay from Connecticut and parts of Massachusetts too, and New Hampshire. But basically, this little marker here is on the side of the road. It was buried in grass, and it says 60 miles from Boston. I found the 60-mile marker, the 65-mile marker, and in Brookfield Center, they have another marker. So these are actual markers that Benjamin Franklin laid. And what he did is he rode the roads, and we don't know whether he invented but used an odometer to measure the exact mileage. And he placed these markers not all the way, but a good deal of the way, 1 mile apart. And he had the townspeople lugging the wagon behind him these stones that were cut out with mileage. Interesting, huh? And they're still standing. It's unbelievable. The oldest marker that we know of, stone marker, and the reason why I'm showing you a drawing of it is because it's so withered, it's in Roxbury. But this is the oldest marker that we think in the Boston area is there. And it's 4 miles from Boston, and there was a townhouse there. It's in Roxbury, right on the main street of Roxbury, 1734. And just the Boston area seems to be one of the older markers. Like I said, I took a picture of it, but it was just so bad, I couldn't even see it. Well, you people probably have some markers around here, but when I do this talk in Arlington, because remember I told you I do this Arlington evening division session, this is a marker. Look how bad they took care of this. This is now all cleaned up. But right parallel to Mass Ave is Paul Revere Road, and I don't know if you can make out, but see the number 8, a circle and a circle? That's 8 miles from Boston. On that particular road is a marker, and I do know that that marker was laid in the 1770s. So not only Arlington, but my point is other towns, besides those on the Boston Post Road, started to lay these particular markers. Okay, taverns were very important. Actually, taverns, once these markers were laid out, they started building taverns right next to these markers, because what better directions could you give than 60 mile or 65 mile or 30 miles from Boston to a passenger or a rider to know where that they could get food and lodging. So many of the taverns today were built near a marker, near a measuring stone marker, okay? The taverns way back in the early days, if you're reading about them, don't get confused, they were called ordinaries, then public houses, and then taverns and inns. So any of those descriptions is what we know as a tavern or an inn today. Now I want to talk about this wagon that's in this picture that I showed you before. This is a Conestoga wagon, okay? And a Conestoga wagon is simply a wagon for merchants, because the next thing after the post rider riding these roads with correspondence was merchants. People started traveling these roads that were merchants. They actually, some of them lived in their wagons. Some of them also stayed overnight at inns and taverns. But they would have all of their merchandise in these open type wagons. They almost look like a chuck wagon. And some of them actually lived in their wagons. And they would travel the post road to various settlements once these roads were laid out. Okay? So merchants would come to people, to settlers. Now, stagecoaches. In 1820 to 1840 was the peak of stagecoaches. And now we had mail, we had merchants, and now we've got stagecoaches now that are going to take over from the post riders. From that January 22nd, 1673 to around the 1820s meant that for 152 years was post riders. And now the stagecoach, being a little bit faster and a little bit more on schedule than the post riders, started carrying mail and passengers on the post roads. Now, if you were traveling in the spring, or in this particular case, in the wintertime, guess what? Not a good time to travel by stagecoach. Because if you get stuck, in this particular case, in a drift, the stagecoach driver would simply get off the stage, sit down on the side of the road and have his pipe. Because he alone couldn't get that coach going, and everybody inside would have to get out and push through the drifts of the snow. Same way in the mud weather. Not too many passengers like traveling in the spring because the same thing. If the coaches got caught in mud, guess what? Everybody had to get out and everybody had to get through. So, as you can see, summer was really great. End of spring, summer was great traveling, early fall. But winter and spring, early spring could be very, very harsh, and you would be expected to pitch in. Now there's a gentleman, Levi Pease, who lived from 1739 to 1824. His nickname was Captain, but guess what? He never really was captain of anything. But that was a nickname that the townspeople and locals called him. Levi Pease was noted for exceptional stage coach schedules, and if there was a storm or his drivers were having a problem, he would jump right in and drive the coaches himself. But he was an expert at setting up stagecoaches. He started on the post roads and extended the stagecoach business up to New Hampshire and out to Worcester and all around. He's a real genius. He was actually called the Stagecoach King. And I was lucky enough to find in Shrewsbury, oh, I'm sorry, I got one other thing. On stagecoaches, this is in Groton, in the center of Groton. And there's also a marker if you get a chance to go on Route 119. My whole point is here. Like I mentioned, Arlington had markers, stone markers, that wasn't on the post road. There were a lot of stagecoach inns like this one in 1678, as early as that, in Groton, Mass, okay? That was stagecoach runs. Now, it's confusing because we're talking on the Boston Post roads, and in fact, what is now Route 119 was Boston Road. You can see here, Great Road, where you people are, and in Acton there's a Great Road. There's also post roads all around, because once the postage system really started to grow from these three roads that we're talking about here, the original roads, different other town roads were called post roads. So you can see where it could be very, very confusing, okay? But this is just an example of an early stage or inn stop in the 1678. Now I did find Levi Pease stone here. It's in Shrewsbury, and I knew it was at a Congregational church, believe it or not. Nice, beautiful white church, but there was nobody around to ask. So I said, what am I going to do? So I took a shot, I went in the graveyard, I'm starting to look around, and there on the right-hand side was a stone marker. Now this is pretty old and pretty faded out, but you can see it says Captain Levi Pease. And even though he wasn't captain, right on his burial, if you will, stone as captain, because that's what he was known by the townspeople. And it tells in 1775 he was actually fought in the Revolutionary War, and then he did all of his stagecoaching after that, in the 1760s and so forth. Now, we cannot leave out the ladies, can we? No, we can't leave out the ladies. There was a lady that did a remarkable thing. Her name was Sarah Knight, K-N-I-G-H-T. Sarah Knight was a remarkable lady. She lived in Boston. Her husband passed away. He was a great businessman. She had a lot of money. But what she really wanted to do was to ride herself by horseback the Boston Post Road. And she did it, okay? She left on October 2nd, 1704. And March 3rd, 1705, she came back. She went all the way from Boston, starting at Boston, came all the way down to New York, and came back again. Now this is unheard of because ladies did not travel alone. Even in coaches, some of the stipulation was that they must be escorted. Okay? Another lady could be with her, or a gentleman, but for a lady to do this feat, if you ever get a chance, read the Journal of Madam Knight, because she was a very learned. She was a school teacher in Boston, a very learned lady, and she wrote a journal of what all the activities and all the hardships she's had on this ride that she did in that time. It's a very interesting journal. Okay, so if you get a chance, read it. This is a picture for it, and I couldn't really get a very dark picture. This is the best I can do, but this is Sarah and I. Okay, the old Kings Highway. I just want to say one thing on toll gates and turnpikes. They go way back in time to the early 19th century. And actually, Massachusetts had, in 1806, 135 turnpikes. Can you believe that? Of course, we all know that they're narrowed down now to the big one, the Mass Pike. But turnpikes and toll gates, some of them were on private property, okay? And what they did is they had a pole or a pike, and they would let somebody go, they just move it aside. Somebody would pay a minimum fee. Later on in time, first everybody just rode through. Then they started getting smart and said, hey, if you're on my property, you're going to pay. It was a minimum amount. But you're going to pay to ride. Could be 50 miles, 30 miles, 20 miles on somebody's property, really. But they would move this pike. You would be able to go onto their property because it was right near the main road, and you would pay to do that. Afterwards, they did away with that and said, hey, private landowners are not going to get any money for this because if these are on public roads, a lot of them. But those that were on private roads had to pay. And that's where, I have not read this yet, but I believe that the term turnpike was that, this pike of pole that would actually turn or open to let these riders come through, these people come through. Okay, oh, I'm sorry. You have something here that I didn't even talk about. The old Kings Highway. This is kind of very interesting. The Post Road, like I said, was known as Post Road, the Great Road, and the Kings Highway. Now the Kings Highway is very interesting. This is on Route 6A. If any of you have property or go down to the Cape, the inner part of the Cape, 6A, beautiful little road, and still has. This is actually, these particular signs, there's 3 of them, have a modern day old Kings Highway. They still call it, a lot of people, the Kings Highway. And the king kind of like didn't charge for this or anything, but he wanted in the colonies to know that, hey, you're still under the king's rule. So we call these roads the King's Road. There was one actually that started from Boston and it went down to South Carolina in the Revolutionary War. A total of 1,300 miles, this King's Highway. But guess what? When the Revolutionary War started, after April 19th, the townspeople would not call it King's Highway. They just called it the Great Road or Post Road. They would not use the term king. Okay? But this is very interesting because this particular sign is near Barnstable. And if any of you people are familiar with that, King's Road there, is the Barnstable Tavern, nice restaurant to eat, established 1799. Barnstable was one of the center, the King's Road, let me explain, went from Plymouth through Barnstable. Barnstable was a major town then in the early days of the King's Road, and out towards beyond Chatham. Okay? And in Barnstable, they still have on 6A the old courthouse, the King's Courthouse. And that's just telling you that they actually held court in Barnstable for any activities down in the Cape area there. That's the sign, and that's the old King's Courthouse there. Okay? Now, I have been traveling this road a lot with my wife, right? Because we come home, I love coming home to 6A because it's just quaint to get on to the Sagamore Bridge there. I have passed this marker, I can't tell you how many times in Barnstable. But the trouble is with Barnstable, you know, it's only 2 lanes and you're looking and you're watching the road. I'm never looking on the side. Well, traffic got a little backed up once and I happened to glance over and I saw this marker, but I had to get going again. So Jean says to me, she says, looks to me like there's something interesting on that. I said, you better believe it. So I turned around and I came, and this is an old marker. Notice this is a modern seal for Barnstable, but this, Barnstable, and this writing here is the original King's Highway marker. To Provincetown, 43 miles this way, and to Plymouth, 34 miles that way. There are a lot of these markers still around on Route 6A, if you look for them. This one's pretty, it's right before, if you're going towards the Sagamore Bridge, just before the tavern, the Barnstable Tavern are in. But there's some on the other side too. So they preserved a lot. Okay, we've talked a lot about, but I have one more other thing to tell you. The old Boston Post roads. Paul Revere, as you know, was the famous and got all the publicity and everything, which was rightfully so, on April 19th, and you people especially know that, right? How many have heard of Israel Bissell? Israel Bissell is a very important fellow, because April 19th, this young lad, 23 years old, was selected to carry the message of what was about to happen in Concord, Massachusetts, from Watertown, Mass. To Philadelphia, to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. Revere and Dawes made their ride to one, we know, Hancock and Adams, but this young lad, 23 years old, assignment was to go and report to the Continental Congress what was about to happen. He was 23 years old. His feat was, and what makes him so interesting, is that he did 345 miles in 4 days. Unbelievable ride. Now, he got in trouble. 40 miles out, when he got to Worcester, when he got off his horse, as soon as he got off his horse fell dead. Because he rode him too hard. He was so anxious as a young lad. So he had to slow the pace up, okay? Which he did. But still, he hardly got any sleep for those 4 days. He took a little time at night to rest his horse in fields and everything. He got the warning all through Connecticut and spread the word of what was about to happen up here in Concord. And actually, General Putnam down in Connecticut got the word from his militia. Old Putt and a couple of others started getting their militia ready to make the march up to Boston. Okay? But this lad at 23 years old did this fantastic ride of 345 miles. He actually died 71 years old, 48 years later. And Kingsborough, which is right on the border of the New York and Massachusetts line, is where his gravestone is, because that's where the town that he finally retired to and had his family. Okay, now we got a lot of the history. Now let's actually travel the post roads, okay? And the first post road that we're going to travel is the lower post road. So if you don't mind, instead of going from New York to Boston, if you don't mind, we're going to go from Boston to New York, okay? Okay, lower post road. You all know, or pretty much can tell that it was later on a lot of what is Route 95 and the old Route 1. How far was this? 270 miles is the lower post road, okay? Well, let's start out in Boston. Boston was founded in the 1630s. What's kind of interesting is if you go into Boston in the Common, okay, it's really nice. They've done a nice job for visitors in the Boston area. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the Common goes way back. It goes back to the founding of Boston in the 1630s. And look at, on their sign it's got the actual Common itself was laid out by 1634. And even though we can't read this, because I wanted to show you the date, there's a very nice little description of cows grazing there, town meetings being held there, and the Frog Pond was the watering hole for horses way back in the 1630s. So we start out again from Boston. I love this because this is the old State House, right? And I love it because it's in the middle of all the modern Boston, right? The only thing is that sometime right over here near a sewer cap is where the Boston Massacre took place, but in fact that isn't the actual place, because Mr. Paul Revere recorded exactly where men fell on that March 5th, 1770. And they now know that even though it's marked here for visitors, that just a little bit over to the right is where actually the men started falling. And he actually drew out a map with footage and everything of where and what he saw on March 5th. And a lot of people think that the old State House goes back in time, and it does. It's very, very old. But it was really only built in 1747. It seems like a lot older building, but it really isn't. But I love it right in the middle of Boston. Now, Boston Stone. I don't know how many of you have heard of the Boston Stone, but how do you get to see this thing? Okay? Any of you hear of the Green Dragon Tavern? Green Dragon Tavern is, if you're looking at Faneuil Hall, the statue of Mine's gone blank here. Sam Adams. Sam Adams. Okay, the street to the right is Marshall Street. Okay, and if you go down Marshall Street and look down the first street on your right from there, you're going to see the Green Dragon Tavern, and it's great. Go have lunch there. Go at Christmas time. It's really nice. They really do it up nice at Christmas time. And it's reasonable, but the reason why I like to have you go there is there's a lot of artifacts of Boston on the walls. A lot of old clay pipes they dug up from the harbor, and a lot of things from the Revolutionary War. When you think about it, that long room up above, the second floor there, is where the Sons of Liberty held their meeting. But my point is, the Boston Stone is, if you're going into the Green Dragon Tavern, you happen to look down on the ground to your left, there's the Boston Stone. And what is the significance of that? Well, in the early 1800s, there was a gentleman that actually was a painter. And he used the stone for his pigments to mix, all of his paints and everything like that. And when he died, another gentleman took over, and he started to build a tavern and a store around 1737. But he also realized one thing. Don't forget, Boston was laid out quite a bit differently, right? With a lot of the water and so forth. And what they started in 1737 on is all mileage from Boston to these various towns going out was measured right at the Boston Stone, because that was the center of Boston. So that's where all the mileage was mentioned. Okay, Dedham is a very old town, okay? You can see that, 1636. But that would be our first going down the coast, going south from Boston. In the lower post road, Dedham would be the first town that we would hit. Okay? In 1635 is when it was settled. Okay, 1635-36. And guess what? The town was named Dedham, but the people wanted to change the town's name. And guess what they wanted to change it to? Contentment. They wanted to call Dedham Contentment. But they said, you know what? It doesn't warrant that, because there really isn't that much contentment, so we're going to leave it at Dedham. And they left it at Dedham, for Dedham, England. So from Dedham, we're continuing along. Providence, Rhode Island, okay, would be the next place. And down from Providence, before you get to Old Mystic, if you want to go to Newport, you're traveling down south, right? But Newport is way on the coast. So what you would have to do is get off just before Old Mystic, and you would have to take a ferry over to Newport. Okay? So if you were going to Newport, and you're traveling the southern road, the lower road, you'd stop, and there was a ferry that would run from that lower post road over to Newport. Mystic, Connecticut. Mystic was very interesting because it had and I'm talking about Old Mystic again, was a whaling port and a trading port and a fishing port. And you can go and visit the schooners. Old Mystic, Connecticut, you can see was settled, even though it's a nice, modern, beautiful sign, beautiful wooden sign, but it was settled in 1654. Old Mystic goes way back. And like I said, you can go on the schooners. Then you come to Old Saybrook. Old Saybrook is really interesting because you come to New London and then Old Saybrook. And I got a story to tell you about that, okay? And this takes place in 1646. In 1646, there was a young couple in Old Saybrook, and they wanted to get married. It was very customary in good weather that they would go to the governor. In this particular case, it was Winthrop. And so they went to New London, which was a few miles north, and they asked if he would marry him, and he said certainly. And it was very customary also to have a lot of townspeople come to the wedding because the governor was presiding over the wedding. And so they asked if he would come to Old Saybrook, and he said certainly. Well, it was in the wintertime, and there was a storm and a half in that area. And overnight, there was a brook, a huge brook, a wide brook, that froze over and became ice, but it wasn't solid enough to cross. So Governor Winthrop was on his way to Old Saybrook and got to the brook and couldn't cross. It was a humongous, long brook. The young couple said, oh, geez, he might not be able to come in the storm. Why don't we head up to New London? He can marry us there. even though other people won't be there because of the weather. So they started, and guess what? They ended up on each side of this brook that's in between New London and Old Saybrook. And they said, what are we going to do? And he said, I'm going to marry you. So from across the brook, they gave the vows and everything. And from that time on, that brook was known as Bride's Brook. And it's just north of Old Saybrook. Little legend that took place there. Okay, I got a story. Now, you know by now I'm good at finding stones, right? I am really good at finding stones. This son of a gun of a stone is sitting in Old Saybrook on the main road. And I'm going up and down the road. It's not that long a road, right? And I cannot find this stone because I wanted it for this particular talk. So it's in a kind of like a green area, like a little common area, but very, very small. So I got the brilliant idea, thank God, of maybe going around the back side to see if I could find it, because most of the stones are right on the road, and this is right on the old King's Highway in Saybrook. So as I went around the back, I saw the back of this stone. I said, oh, this is great. So when I went around the front, I realized why I couldn't see it. See the shadow of all these shrubs and bushes? That was covering the entire stone. So if you people don't say anything, I took all that shrub away. I'm doing a good deed, right? So I took it away, and I was able to make out 1, 4, M, 2, and L. 14 miles to New London. One of the oldest stones from the old King's Highway. And, like I said, now people can see the front, even though I doubt anybody but myself would be interested in taking a picture of this. But look how weathered it is. And it really goes back to the early days. Okay, from Old Saybrook, we go to Eli's Ferry. And Eli's Ferry, that's my truck, was supposed to have a foundation, which nobody knew where it was, of where the ferry boats would go. Now from this point, if you were going to the Connecticut River west, you would have to get off the post road, the lower post road, and take a ferry to the Connecticut Valley or Connecticut River, okay? But I couldn't find, and nobody knew, and I asked tons of people in this area where this old foundation was, and nobody knew about it. But this is the bridge, they told me, of where the ferry used to cross. So at least I got a picture of the bridge anyway. Guilford, Connecticut, very old, very nice, quaint place. This is the Highland House, one of the oldest houses there. This house goes back to 1660, and it's beautifully kept, as you can see. And it does say on the side, even though you probably can't read it, Highland House, 1660. There is another marker here, a stone marker in the road, but I didn't take a picture of it. From Guilford, we go to New Haven, Connecticut. Then we go to Fairfield, Connecticut. Fairfield, Connecticut was in fact a stagecoach stop in the coaching days. Then we get down to Greenwich, Connecticut. Now Greenwich, Connecticut, in the early days, they had what they call skinners or bushwhackers. And they actually didn't really rob people, but they played havoc with the stagecoaches that went by. And so they started carrying arms. They never really used them. They started carrying side pieces just for protection. And these were just instigators. They called them skinners and wranglers and stuff like that. But it was just a little part down near the Greenwich area that played havoc. Rye, New York, we're getting down to about 32 miles from New York City. Then Kingsbridge, and then we go into New York City. And we now have traveled the southern, if you will, starting from Boston, going down here, going down to Hartford, and down into New York City. And when I say New York, just below the financial district of New York was a fort, and that was the end of the route if you were coming from Boston, or the beginning of the route leaving from New York. Now the middle road, there isn't too much to see, I do, but I want to take you there anyway. So we're going to go Boston, right here, okay, to Dedham. Then we're going to go westerly on this very short road here. And that's going to be the post road for the middle post road. Okay, Boston we already looked at. But this is back in Dedham again. And I urge you, if you haven't been there, the Fairbanks House in Dedham is a very interesting house. Look at the structure of the house. It goes back to 1636. Look at the nooks and crannies. It's got the low ceilings and everything. This is in Dedham, and Fairbanks was a very wealthy, prominent family in New England. But I want to tell you, I had a job when they took me on a tour of this particular house, because guess what? This goes back to 1636, a fairly tall fella. This is how I went through the house. I'm not kidding you, that's exactly what I did. Every part of that house is intact, exactly the way it was built. The floors and everything. And the lady that gave the tours is excellent there. But boy, I'll tell you, even upstairs, going through the rooms, for a tall person, you really have to kind of get down. It's a fascinating house, and I urge you to go see that if you get a chance. Okay, from Dedham, we start swinging westerly, like I said, through Thompson, Connecticut, and then Putnam, Connecticut. Putnam, Connecticut is really interesting. Okay, Putnam, Connecticut has the Quannaboag Valley, and it also has the Cargill Falls. This is the Cargill Falls today, which isn't really a very swift-running falls. Can you see okay? Do I keep going in front of you? Okay. I have a habit of people on the side and walking over here in front. I hope you can see. Okay, and this is in Putnam, Connecticut. Now, north of Putnam is the French River. French River runs really northeast, and it's a long river. And the Indian tribes of the French River would come down the French River to north of Putnam and trade with the white settlers. So that was a very important trading center because of this French River with the Indians. The falls in the early days were very high, fast-moving falls. This is the falls today. Now, two things about Putnam, Connecticut that's kind of interesting is one little section of Putnam is back in the 1950s. Sometime they park an old 1950s car there. They have the old lamp lights from the 1950s and a couple of buildings. And they preserve that little area. But most of the other part of Putnam, Connecticut, if you've ever been there, is antique galore, isn't it? They have a lot of buildings and stores and antiques all over the place. So if you like to just go along, take 95 and swing off on Route 144, and go westerly to Putnam, Connecticut. Very interesting, quaint little town. From there we go to Hartford, Connecticut. Okay? And it's actually at Hartford, Connecticut where the middle and upper road meet. This is Hartford, Connecticut. And the upper road comes down to Hartford, and the middle road meets at Hartford. Okay? It was a stagecoach stop because of the meeting of those two prominent roads. Okay? New Haven, Connecticut, back in 1701, started getting very, very popular. Why? Because people were starting to go to Yale University, which was founded in 1701. Then from there you go down to New Haven, Connecticut. Okay, right down here, New Haven. And now we're back on track again to Fairfield, Greenwich. And the other thing about Greenwich is, see Long Island here? This part right in here of the old Boston Post Road, right in there, the terrain was very, very bad. When the post riders were traveling it, in the winter and the spring, it was one of the muddiest, one of the snowiest areas. The road itself for years was all dug up and everything, and then they finally laid logs on the side of the road and put logs in the road, covered it up with some of the loam and dirt, and made it a much better road. But in the early days, that was one of the roughest parts. When you left New York, that little stretch, and when you were coming back, going into New York, right around that Greenwich area. Rye, New York was a stagecoach stop before going into New York City. And interestingly enough, in 1789, New York City had a population of 30,000. And that was a really big populated place. In 1991, by the Almanac census, it was 18 million people in that area, New York City. But that takes in all of the boroughs. My point is that in the 1789 that I mentioned, 30,000 people was a lot of people. Okay? So now let's kind of go and take our last trip on the upper road. And this is the one that I love, because this is the original old Boston Post Road. This was the first road laid. And again, we will go from Boston. We're going to go westerly out to Springfield. Then we're going to cut down here to New Haven and Hartford and New York. But there's a lot of interesting things on this road, okay? The middle road, I mentioned 270 miles, was the upper road. 225 miles is the middle road in mileage. And the Upper Boston Post Road is 250 miles long. Okay? Now, the old Boston Post Road was known also as the Westerly Road. And it makes sense because that road is the first road that goes west. All the other two roads go pretty much south. But this goes directly west, as you're going to see. So we leave Boston, okay, and we come to Cambridge, because that's where you're traveling. And right near Brattle Street is where you're going. And notice even today, it's very, very interesting, because on the bottom of a lot of the signs, and on Brattle Street, a lot of them have Watertown Path, 1630. In 1630, there was that path. Remember I said Watertown, Sudbury was connected, and Concord way back when? Well, this was just a path in Cambridge, okay, back in the 1630s. So Watertown Path would be part of the old Boston Post Road. That would be the first place you would be heading out towards from Boston. Cambridge was settled in 1630. Cambridge is interesting because a lot of people know that Cambridge was not originally Cambridge, but Newtown, and then it was changed to Cambridge as different towns were incorporated. But listen to the space and the territory that in the 1630s, Newtown or Cambridge had. Newtown took in what is now Newton, Brighton, Cambridge, Arlington or Monotony, Lexington, which was Cambridge Farms, Bedford, and Billerica. That was all Newtown in the 1630s. And then, of course, as each town got incorporated, they had their own name and their own town. But isn't that amazing, from Cambridge, near the Boston area, that it went out all the way to Billerica, originally in the 1630s. Okay, so that's where we're on our way now, towards Watertown. We catch a piece of Watertown, and we're on Route 20, traveling towards Weston. And if anybody is from out of state, remember, I think it was in tonight's news, they were talking about changing Route 128 because it's confusing. Route 128, 95, Route 1, okay? This can be very confusing. Route 20 is very nice and goes along, but when you get to Weston, there's a sign that says Boston Post Road, which is on Route 20, going this way, and another sign saying Boston Post Road, going west. Well, it does, because originally, it stopped right near the center of Weston on Route 20 and went through the center of Weston by the Golden Ball Tavern and came back onto what is now Route 20. But if people see this, and probably they wouldn't, pay too much attention, but if they saw this, they probably got confused saying, hey, we think we're on the Boston Post Road, but there's another sign going the other way. And Weston would be one of the first, maybe not a stagecoach stop. Don't forget, when you left Boston, by stagecoach, you didn't leave at a leisurely 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. You left at 3 or 3:30 in the morning for your coach ride, heading towards New York, or any direction that way, okay? So by the time you got to Weston, by stage, some of the drivers would, in fact, pull over and change horses, or in fact, have people go to the Golden Ball Tavern for their breakfast, okay? This is the Golden Ball Tavern in Weston. But most of them didn't. I'm just saying some of the drivers, that would be a stop. Some of them. Where they really went was a little bit further to Sudbury, to the Wayside Inn. Sudbury, Boston Post Road was settled in 1638. Okay? And this is a shot that I wish I could have got rid of. This, the modern, and maybe this little sign, because this is exactly, by stagecoach, exactly the original little road going in, that little tiny road that leads up to the Wayside Inn. Right over here is the Wayside Inn. And it's a beautiful road, and in the fall it is so pretty with the colors, just great. I might try to get a better shot, and I'd like to do it in the fall. But it's just to give you an idea of how you're traveling and coming into to the Wayside Inn. But was it the Wayside Inn? Oh, no. Originally, it was Howe's Inn, or Howe's Ordinary. And David Howe, the Howe family, really owned what we now know as the Wayside Inn for many years. In 1686, they started. 1683, they built it, the tavern, and they made it an official inn and everything. And through the years, the Howe family actually took over and owned that. So it was Howe's Inn for a long time. Ezekiel Howe, in the mid-1800s, around the 1770s, 1760s, changed the name from Howe's Inn, or Howe's Tavern, to the Red Horse Inn. And that's why you see today the Red Horse on there, because that in fact was one of the names. And then when Henry Wadsworth Longfellow came through and did his Tales of the Wayside Inn, that's when he actually changed. He actually got them thinking and used the term of what a beautiful wayside inn this is. What a beautiful, picturesque place this is. And Tales of the Wayside Inn, I urge you to read it. It's a nice little book. I would normally have it on display, except guess what? It's holding my projector up, so I can get to this slide. But I'll put it out on the table, and it's very nice. You can get it out in Sudbury at the Wayside Inn. I believe libraries have it too. Tales of the Wayside Inn is very interesting. Well, after he took over, in 1923, Mr. Henry Ford bought all of this property, and he actually bought 5,000 acres. It's actually 5,000 acres of land there. And then later on in time, this is the third private owner of the inn now. This is now privately owned. And this is, I believe, the third. It's at least two privately owners, but I believe this is the third. The reason why I show the front of the Wayside Inn, sometime the whole Wayside Inn further back, is when I give this talk, I'm all over the place. And a lot of people, believe it or not, have never been to the Wayside Inn. And so you people, I think, probably would have gone there, but I encourage people, if you haven't, to do that on Route 20, okay? Okay, Spencer. Oh boy, Spencer, I love Spencer. I was there early in the morning. From Sudbury, we're going to Marlborough, then we're going still west to Worcester, and then we come into a quaint little town of Spencer, okay? It wasn't Spencer on the original post road was made, because it was incorporated in 1753. But I wanted to find a marker of Jenks Tavern. Isaac Jenks owned 3 taverns, and one of the taverns was probably the most elite tavern, really noted for its food. And George Washington, you know, a lot of these things, George Washington stopped here, which he did make a lot of stops on his way to Cambridge in 1775. He actually stopped at Jenks Tavern and commented to Mrs. Jenks, "You have the finest shortcake that I've ever tasted." I wanted a picture of that particular tavern. So I go into a local diner in Spencer on Route 9, and I go in, and of course the people to ask I now know is the Historical Society, if you're looking for things, and the locals, because these people know everything, right? So I go into the diner, having coffee, and I go to one of the locals and I said, "Could you tell me if I could get a picture of where the Jenks Tavern is?" He said, "Not there." I said, "No?" He said, "No, it's gone." I said, "Massasoit Hotel was put there afterwards," and he walked off. And I said, "Well, that's nice, so maybe I can get a picture of the hotel and everything." Well, one of the other fellows overheard me asking him that. So as I was leaving, he says, "You're not going to find a hotel." I said, "Why?" He said, "It burnt down in 1915. I said, "Oh, geez." I said, so then I get smart. I said, "Jenks Tavern, where was it?" He says, "Oh," he says, "there's a stone marker where George Washington stayed there." He says, "You want the stone marker?" I said, "I'd love to see that." So I got a stone marker. It's on the little green. It's actually right outside from this diner, okay? And it says George Washington passed through here. And there's Jenks Tavern located on this site. So there was a tavern right there on what is now Route 9. But because of everything I went through with this diner and everything, the Kentwood Diner, I happened to get a picture of the old and the new diner. The old being the Moxie sign, and the new being the motorcycle. And if you want a good cup of coffee and a sandwich, it's great. The Kentwood Diner right on Route 9. Okay, now we get into the Brookfield area, and I did show you some pictures, and there are a lot of markers in the Brookfield area of the fighting, not only of King Philip's War, but of taverns that were on a back road. And notice that we break it down to Brookfield, there's West Brookfield and so forth. Well, in West Brookfield, this is Route 9, and this is heading towards Worcester, okay? On the side is Foster Hill Road. And it runs parallel to Route 9. It's probably about 6 miles, and that's where all these stone markers are and everything. But if you want a nice little ride, the Historical Society from Spencer put up this sign and another sign. We won't take the time to read it now, but there's telling you a little bit about the road and what's on there. A lot of it is Revolutionary War time and King Philip's War time. Okay, I have one more story to tell you, and this is my friend Joseph Waite, W-A-I-T, Esquire. He lived in Brookfield, okay? And this takes place in 1763. Now, Joseph Waite started out from Brookfield and was going to Springfield, Mass. And he got caught up, yep, you're right, in another huge storm. It was so bad, he thought he was going to die from the snow. It was coming down so hard. And he was out there almost 3 days trying to find and get to any town, and he almost lost his life. But when he finally got through, guess what? He made it to Springfield, and he was so thankful that he did that he put up a stone marker. And it's another one of those markers where you really can't read it that well. It's in the center of Springfield. So this is just kind of a drawing of the marker. It's got Post Road. This stone is erected by Joseph Waite, Esquire, in Brookfield. For the benefit of travelers is the name of this stone. Because he found his way to Springfield, he figured, boy, I'm saved and I got to Springfield, so he erected this stone. In 1763, he erected it. But notice it tells us a little bit about him. Notice the markings. In all probability, he probably was a mason, because those are pretty much mason markings that are on here. So that tells us a little bit about him. We do know he was a farmer. But he almost got killed in this particular blizzard. Okay, from Springfield, we get down to Hartford, Connecticut again, the same old route, Greenwich, Connecticut, Greenwich, Connecticut, New York City, and we now really had traveled the old Boston Post roads. Now, I only had an hour to do this. There is so much on the old Post Road compared to the others to see. I've just kind of given you a flavoring of some of my travels, some of the things that I went through. So we've done the 3 roads. You have a map there of kind of like the late 1630s. It does not give every single town. It gives a lot of the old town on the post roads, okay? And today, there is obviously a lot of things with post road on it. This is in Marlborough, and I don't think I probably could have got this focused a little better. But this says Post Road Plaza, okay, in Marlborough. I had to take a liquor sign. There's Post Road. That's just outside of Marlborough. Okay. Post Road in Weston and along Route 20, you see that a lot. Post Road signs. Okay. And this is kind of interesting. I took this from the Museum of National Heritage. Okay, and they were doing a big thing on tavern signs and travel. And this is the old Route 1 sign, an original old steel sign. Okay, and Route 1 started up near Bangor, Maine. They started in 1926, originating the road, and it took from 1926 to 1950 to complete the entire road to make it passable. Okay? And I want to just give you a little piece of advice. Stone markers and things that I've taken pictures of is for the public, so you don't have to really ask. I did not ask to take this picture, right, in the Museum of National Heritage. Now, when I go in a museum, for other things that I do and talk about, I always ask permission. Because, in fact, there was one place, Fruitland, that they would not let me take a picture of King Philip's Walkway. Absolutely wouldn't let me do it. So it's a good idea if you're in museum or buildings or whatever that are not in the public areas to ask. Wouldn't you know, the first talk I gave was to the Lexington Historical Society, and who's sitting in the audience but the curator of the National Museum? So I went over to him, I knew him very well, and I said, John, I'm sorry, but I said, you know, I couldn't resist, and I'm asking you now, can I take a picture of this? And he said, go right ahead, be my guest. But you really should ask. And I just took this and left without even thinking, and lo and behold, he was sitting out there, and I could see him smiling, but I don't think it made any difference to him. But just for your own benefit, you know, if you're doing stuff like that. And now I would like to leave you with something. I'd like to leave you with, if you're ever doing research, I hope you don't run into this. On this site in 1860, nothing happened.
Thank you, Mr. Hoagland.
You're very welcome.
Are there any questions? Anybody want to ask him anything?
Are there any questions? Don't tell me I did that good. Yeah.
There's a post road marker on North Road in Bedford.
Okay.
120, not 140.
Okay, like I said, in this area, there are post roads and great roads, and in Groton, it's the Boston Road, because it led to Boston from New
Taken
Hampshire.
over in recent years.
Right.
We used to have marks.
Right, right. So there are, like I said, great and post roads, but weren't really on the old Boston post roads. What you have in front of you in your map are the roads, the original roads. Okay? Any other? Sure.
How often does mail come when the post riders versus when the stagecoach started? How often does mail come across?
I don't have statistics, but they cut the time in over half. Mainly because a lot of the post riders, being one person, could be sick along the way and could get held up by horse that stagecoaches could come. So they cut the mail time almost in half that the post riders could do.
So it was like once every week or once every month?
Yeah, and again, too, it depended on, they could break down, coaches could break down. Some stagecoach riders would spend a little bit longer at inns for eating, okay? And incidentally, the Wayside Inn, the one thing, in the tap room of the Wayside Inn is a doorway there. I haven't asked to go up, but if you go upstairs there, there's 4 rooms where the coach drivers used to stay at the Wayside Inn. Any other? Yes?
Do you have any idea how much it costs to take a letter from between New York and Boston?
It was 3 pence and then 2 shillings. Don't forget, we were under English rules, so it was in English money. Not really a lot of money to send a letter all the way from Boston to New York. The postage rates went up a little bit more when Franklin formalized the postal system. And if you need that, I can get you that, because there's a nice chart showing you the difference. But it was very minimum in the old days, and people didn't have a lot of money then too. When you sent the letter, I mean, you wrote a lot. But again, don't forget the receiving end of all of this, depending on where you're sending it, you're probably 2 and 3 months behind in the news with these post riders. Well, thank you very much for having me tonight.
Thank you, and don't forget, next month. Don't forget, next month, March, the program will be headed up by Don Corey, and we'll be talking about our own Bedford, right, John?
Right.
Okay, so we'll see you next
We're
month.
gonna
Thanks
have
for
the
coming.
old Davis spinning wheel on display. And we're going to be in the other.
We're going to be in the, not in this room, we're going to be in the other room, so we'll come in that door, because this is going to be filled with the church is having a rummage sale at the next Saturday, so this will be all filled up with what they're selling. So we'll be in that other room where we were the last time. Oh, all right, and there are displays there. If some of you came in later, you can look at on the table. Thank you for coming.